You take your seats, we'll get started. My name's Kelly Duncan. I'm president of the Audubon Commission. This is our fourth public meeting relative to the master plan for Audubon Park. We really appreciate all the input we've gotten from all of you and for others. We've now, I think, gotten over 3,000 responses to our website and survey, which we're delighted to have. We've obviously had some great input from you and others who've attended the previous meetings, and we're delighted you can be here tonight. I'm going to really, at this point, turn it over to Mark Ripple, who is with the SQ Dumez Ripple architectural firm, who's been our primary consultant on the master plan and has been doing a terrific job. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. A show of hands, how many of you have been to one or more of the previous community meetings? Terrific. Okay, so we got a couple that it's their first time. Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming. This is community meeting number 4. Just touching on a couple points, we will have some folks speaking in addition to myself. We've got from Spockman Mossop Michaels, we have Emily Bullock will be speaking about some of the landscape ideas in the master plan. And from Urban Systems, we have Allison Catarella Michel. Urban Systems has been for the last 30 years or so the premier urban traffic planning firm here in the city of New Orleans. As we said, this is the 4th of the 4 community meetings. In the last one, we vetted a number of draft ideas. We've also, since the 3rd meeting, put a draft of the master plan online for you to look at, and hopefully many of you were able to and can provide comments during the comment section.
I've been remiss in not recognizing Joe Geruso, our very new council person. I appreciate you being here, Joe, and thank you for taking the time to be with all of us.
So at this point, I'm going to have Kyle come up and talk about the data gathering and the survey work that's been done over the last several months.
Thank you, Mark, and thank all of you for coming out. For those that I haven't met before, my name is Kyle Burks, and I'm the Vice President and Managing Director of Audubon Zoo and Audubon Park. Just to quickly review how we landed on the draft plan and the recommendations that are in there. As Mr. Duncan said, we've been able to get input from thousands of people on this plan, and what's really driven it, in addition to talking with our community and working online and in person to get it, is some additional data points. First is really a comprehensive tree inventory. The trees in the park are what makes it fantastic and special in many regards, and so we did a comprehensive inventory earlier this year, and we have that database available to us now to help plan for tree preservation. Next, we did some extensive traffic analysis that you'll hear more about later as we talk about how individuals moving to, through, and past the park will influence the plan as we move forward. As we said, those surveys have been incredibly important to us. We did over 500 intercepts of park users in March. Those were in-person surveys that were collected by people using the park every day that were done by a professional research firm, as well as the near 1,000 surveys that were completed online. And we broadcast the availability of that survey across the city. We recognize that there's a chance we may not catch all of the park users in the park on a daily basis, but by promoting that online survey through a variety of news venues and others, we hope to catch the interest of anyone who truly cared about the park and wanted to share their input. Additionally, through land use mapping, our planners were able to actually do detailed analysis of how the park land is divided into programmed and unprogrammed space, looking at the implications of some of the decisions that we would make as we moved forward in the plan. And then from a community engagement standpoint, Those surveys and intercept surveys, as we talked about, were incredibly important. We continued throughout the process and actually continue to hope that we will get more public comment through written comments. You can email those directly to us, as well as visit audubonparkmasterplan.org to share your written comments. And then finally, these community meetings collectively, this being the fourth one, we now know that we've touched thousands of people in a variety of venues to really lay the framework that Mark will explain that has evolved into the draft plan and the recommendations. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, and he can explain the planning methodology.
So what we have heard has been consistent, and it's been consistent not just in the surveys, but in the community meetings. While there are voices at ends of the spectrum that say, well, we need more program, we need less program, we need to decant it. What we've heard consistently is the vast majority of the community is saying we have sufficient development and we don't need any more in the park. Let's maintain what we're doing. Let's do what we're doing better to where it serves the community better, but let's not expand anymore. And what you see, even though in Audubon Park there's a separate piece for Riverview, there's slightly different priorities about whether it's walking paths, whether it's lighting, whether it's drainage. But consistently what it is the underpinning is let's do what we're doing better and more efficiently, but not expand it. And that's the underpinning for our master plan. So the methodology that we're using is, as we've said before, this excludes the golf course and the zoo and focuses on what we call the 3 districts of the park. District 1, which is over at St. Charles, Exposition, and Walnut. Area 2, the Magazine Street corridor, addressing issues of access across Magazine and dealing with an increasingly busier and busier street. How do we create the best venue for the community dealing with the street down the middle of the park? And then finally, the Riverview, both in terms of physical access as well as since it is the focused area of the programmed activities. This master plan is building off of work that was abruptly stopped at the 90% stage in 2004-2005 by Katrina, but it's important to note that a number of projects that came out of that unfinished master planning have been in fact executed, but in that 13-year span. And we're going to do this again as we did in meeting number 3. I'm going to give you a little 3-minute slideshow because we think it's so important to explain the underpinnings of the master plan. The word that consistently comes out in all of the meetings that we've had as we've discussed it is balance. The park is trying to be a lot of things to a lot of different people in the community. And the challenge for us as planners and the challenge for the park itself, for the Audubon Institute, is to find the balance, find that greatest common good. So we started with the mission statement of the Audubon Institute and drilled it down to 4 basic messages. And what's interesting is these messages are necessarily in conflict, that active recreation sometimes flies in the face of passive relaxation. And creating what, in many ways, the Audubon Park is, I would like to say, is the new town square of the city. It is used in different ways, unimagined ways, than it could have imagined being used 100 years ago. It has a cultural significance. So having people at the focus versus having nature at the focus sometimes puts those 2 things in conflict. So I'm just going to read a little 3-minute thing that we had put together with photos. We said we strive for balance between fundamental ideas about the park and its mission, balance between active recreation and passive relaxation, between nature as the focus and people as the focus, and we strive to celebrate each. Since its inception, the park has straddled the Victorian ideals of passive contemplation versus the progressive ideals of the strenuous life. Olmsted's legacy lives on in the park, and his inspiring vision can be experienced by us a century later. Much has changed since the park's inception in the 1890s, and much remains the same. But at its core, the park provides the opportunity to retreat from the urban condition for a moment and to refresh one's soul. It can be done through the contemplation of nature, or by active engagement with nature, or simply by observing the natural condition. It gives us a place to rest a while, to enjoy one's family, to play, to decompress. Fountains become watering holes. Open spaces become cross-country routes. Trees become art objects. We experience the power and the majesty of the river. We socialize. We dream. We use the park in new and unanticipated ways that reflect our culture and our values. We celebrate as a community. Our rituals take on a richer and deeper meaning, and our collective memory of life's experiences is enhanced. We experience the unique qualities of an urban park in a magical city, where culture and activities constantly evolve. An open space becomes a frisbee football field. A baseball diamond becomes a soccer field. A soccer field becomes a crawfish boil. A fountain becomes a photo opportunity or a dog bathtub. A tree becomes a bed. There are opportunities for the healthy and for the infirmed. A single venue can become either active or passive, depending entirely on the users. Programmed activities such as golf provide opportunities for inspiring vistas, complementing one's experience of the park, framing views, and celebrating the historic architectural context. For this is an urban park in a delicate balance with a historic residential neighborhood, where one experience accentuates the other and the lines are necessarily blurred. We can choose the well-worn paths or the paths less traveled. We strive to balance needs between cars and pedestrians. We strive to provide more gracious accommodations for families and accessibility for all. The park has changed much in the last century, and much remains the same. We strive to provide opportunities to refresh our souls as a group and as an individual, and we look for balance. So obviously this is the thematic message that permeates the entire master plan, is how do we achieve that balance? How do we achieve the greatest common good for the community in accordance with the mission statement of the Audubon Institute? So building off of the 12 draft ideas that we floated in meeting number 3, it's the same 12 ideas with a little bit more vetting in certain areas. I know time is limited, so we may go through some of these rather quickly, and others that we believe we've gotten a lot of input on, we're going to spend a little bit more time on. So building on the successes, again, the underpinning is of this entire master plan is the first one, maintaining a balance and variety of uses. When we think about active versus passive use, it's not a black and white kind of issue. It's not a this or that. It's a wide spectrum with lots of things in between that. So that's important to understand. So when we start looking at land use, we say a soccer field becomes a kite area, a green space becomes a frisbee football field. Sometimes it's difficult to categorize some of those things as active, passive, programmed. So it's important to understand that it is indeed a spectrum. But the important message that we're saying here and that is reflected in the master plan is we believe the current balance of uses in the park is appropriate, and that there should be no more expansion of the programmed activities in the park than that currently exists. That's the words you're hearing from me. It's the words that will be in the master plan itself. There's been a lot of misinformation about, somebody I think had reported, well, I heard only 15% of the park is green space, the other 85% is programmed. We have this information available. We did AutoCAD calculations to calculate precisely the acreage. The acreage we've broken down into about 15 different categories. Of the 320 acres, we've got a category for each. If that's too much information and you'd like to editorialize by saying, well, I'd like to consider the lagoon with the golf course, or I'd like to consider this parking lot with the zoo, you have the ability to do that with the acreage that is here. We've editorialized a tad bit by summarizing this into 4 categories. And I'd say the one piece of editorializing is that the lagoon that runs closest to Exposition Boulevard, in this case we have calculated it, the strip of blue, it's kind of hard to see the color. We've calculated that with the green open space and calculate 132 acres of open space and lagoon. In addition, we have a line item for the programmed open space at soccer at 7.5 acres because unlike baseball or tennis, it's not a fenced-in area. Sometimes it is used for crawfish boils or other activities. But again, you can editorialize as you choose, but when you run the calculations, what it shows is those first 2 areas at roughly 140 acres out of the 320 represents approximately 20% of the park as green open space. I'm sorry. Did I say 40% of the park as green open space? The next 2 recommendations are necessarily linked. Lighting and security are things that we heard consistently. We're not going to dwell on this because there has not been a lot of commentary since then, but suffice to say that we're looking at areas in the park where we can introduce lighting that does not bleed into the neighborhoods, that is only the minimum amount of lighting that's needed to provide safe, secure walkability of walking paths, bike paths, etc., and that will be included in the master plan. And similarly, recognizing that there are areas of the park that we need to pay close attention to security. The programmed activities, I'd like a show of hands. We've always had great representation from the folks involved in tennis. Do we have a good tennis? Well, there it is. Yes. So we're going to be talking about that in a second. So programmed activities, of course, excluding, as we said, the golf and the zoo, we have 6. We have swimming, baseball, soccer, tennis, horseback riding, and if you count the children's playground area as a programmed activity, that would be the 6th. There has been ongoing commentary about soccer, but nothing compared with the commentary so far about tennis. So let's talk about that a bit. What is clear is that, several generations of tennis, has occurred here at the park. It's a wonderful legacy kind of activity that has happened for generations, and it is hugely popular. And to summarize, there are 2 categories of things that would be in the master plan. One would be basic maintenance and renovations. That goes without saying. It's true whether it's tennis or a walking path or parking or whatever, that basic maintenance to maintain what we have, the venue that we have, is going to, excuse me, my throat's getting dry. Maintaining what we have is essential to the operation of the park. The issue in question is the ability or the desire to extend the park hours to evening tennis and to provide lighting. Thank you, Ron. To extend the park hours to the evening time and provide lighting. We have heard very compelling arguments for why that makes sense from the tennis community, so thanks again for coming out and voicing your support. What we have not heard nearly enough of is what are the negatives to the community in terms of light bleeding in the adjacent neighborhoods, or potentially just issues of congestion in the evening. Since it is at this point still very much a one-sided conversation, after discussing this with the Audubon Institute, what we're recommending is that we use a similar public process to this public process that we're using for the master plan to drill down specifically on the tennis venue and be able to have focused conversations about how we can support the advocates for tennis and simultaneously not create any undue harm to the neighborhood. So Kyle will talk about that a little bit in terms of what that process might look like, and there's another specific idea in mind, another project, if you will, that we are going to suggest using that same process. So to talk a little bit about tree management and landscape in general, Emily, come on up.
This map illustrates the tree canopy within the park, which you can see is quite extensive. As Kyle mentioned earlier, Audubon has undertaken an tree inventory and created a database of all their trees. In addition to that, the park has registered many of their most historic live oak trees with the Live Oak Society. So you can visit their website and learn more about those trees as well as their names. Some of the key points that we want to highlight in the master plan are that the trees are Audubon Park's most significant and valuable asset. It's really what makes the park unique. And from that, protecting the trees was a top priority from all park users, as well as park staff that we spoke with. Audubon already undertakes measures to protect the trees, including protecting them from lightning and termites, as well as deep root fertilizing to keep them healthy. And then one of our recommendations is to build upon these existing measures and also implement additional strategies for safeguarding the trees for the future. One of the biggest threats to the trees in Audubon Park is people parking on under the critical root zone of the trees. And we recommend implementing some additional, more robust strategies to prevent that from happening. This particularly happens along Magazine Street and in the Riverview. And this happens during overflow parking events. For example, you can see that if we were to remove some of those parking under the critical root zone, it would only be a loss of about, a very minimal number of parking spaces. We've investigated a few strategies that could be implemented that would be a more robust way to keep cars from parking under the trees. Those would be some physical barriers, like building curbs or installing bollards. Additionally, we've proposed that planting could be implemented underneath the trees to deter parking, and we understand that this comes with additional maintenance concerns as well that the park would have to consider.
Thank you. So as we move on to the challenges, the biggest single challenge that we see that continues to come up is in the Magazine Street corridor. We have essentially a busy thoroughfare that in effect bifurcates the park, number one. Number two, the popularity of Riverview and means that the accessibility to it, having to cross the railroad tracks and having this relatively tight condition to get to and from the Riverview is central. So to that extent, we brought in Urban Systems to be able to do a traffic analysis, and Allison will report out on some of the findings.
Good evening. So I'm going to talk for about an hour on the traffic study that we conducted. Actually, I've been told I have a few minutes, so I'm going to try to keep it high level. We did conduct a study since that third community meeting, and we took a lot of data. Shown here are traffic counts. We took traffic counts on a typical weekday evening and on a Saturday when there were busy activities. Interesting findings, the volumes on Magazine were fairly similar, although a little higher during the evening peak on a weekday. Obviously higher coming in and out of the zoo itself on Saturday, but accessing the Fly and the Riverview area was higher on the evening peak, and so that was interesting. Also, just in terms of a split of traffic, half and half were coming, I don't know if there's a pointer, but the entrance point to the Fly, as I call it, most of us do, it's about 50-50 directional, and then exiting is about the same. So that is something to keep in mind as we look at some of the alternatives we considered. We looked at 3 of the intersections focused on Magazine. Obviously, Magazine belongs to the city and not to Audubon, but they are 3 main access points that we looked at. Some of the existing challenges are that we're trying to accommodate many users all at the same locations. We're trying to accommodate transit, bicyclists, motorists, and as well as pedestrians, all in these same 3 intersections. We developed concepts for potential improvements that we looked at to especially try to separate those users and provide safe crossings for bicyclists and pedestrians while still maintaining traffic. We looked at these at all of the intersections that we talked through. We looked at maybe left turn lanes on Magazine, again, something that would have to be coordinated with the city. Right now, we have a striped crosswalk, but not at all of these locations. One of the things I'm going to point out in a minute is a possibility of reversing the flow on East Drive and why that might be advantageous. Part of it looked at these other 3 intersections within the Audubon area itself, both crossings at the railroad tracks where you enter and exit the Riverview area. And these are constrained right now. It's a railroad crossing, and there are not pedestrian accommodations at this moment at those locations. The pedestrians and the bicyclists are with the vehicles in the road. And then we also looked at intersection number 3 at Chabatulas as an opportunity area, and I'll explain that. So this is the current configuration of Riverview as far as how traffic circulates. It's all one way, and it's actually wide enough for 2-way, but right now every person who enters and exits has to travel the entire distance, which means no matter where you live, every single person who comes in or out, if you live on one side or the other, is going to go by you, and everyone has to travel the entire way. And they talked about parking a little bit. If you don't find a parking spot to go all the way around, is obviously a little circuitous and takes a while. So we explored the idea of a 2-way system, converting it completely to a 2-way. This would have some advantages, especially if you leave the existing pavement as it is, which is wide enough for 2-way traffic. There's a couple of bottlenecks, but that has a positive effect of traffic calming. So if vehicles are having to be aware of motorists coming in the other way, they're going to naturally slow down versus right now they have a nice wide open area and they can travel faster. Also with regard to parking, if you're having to look in both directions, you're more aware of your surroundings than if you're just looking in one direction. So there are some positive, in the traffic world, we call it traffic calming aspects of 2-way operation on this roadway. Another intriguing opportunity is potentially looking at East Drive and having it reversed in the other direction and using Chabatulas as an exit. You could still do the 2-way and but have East Drive through there as 1-way. That might give you an opportunity to potentially restripe. If that's still going to be 1 lane, you could potentially have a shared use path on the existing pavement to accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians without having to add any pavement and use what you have. Another idea is to utilize that Chabatulas corridor if you do have the 2-way operation as an entrance point, which could be helpful in general, and then also during the construction of Magazine, which is planned by the city. I think at this point, you come up? Yep. I didn't take an hour.
Thank you. As we look at traffic, one of the things we do that's a little bit counterintuitive, sometimes people say, well, you know, if there's so many cars, we need wider lanes, we need more parking. We finished 2 years of work up at LSU, the master plan. The traffic consultant took exactly the opposite venue and saying, basically, if you build it, they will come. The more easy it is for cars to get through, the more cars will come, and it exacerbates the problem rather than solving it. One of the things, and you can see from the photo here, this did happen to be when it was the sheriff's Easter egg hunt. So there happened to be a lot of families, and particularly families with strollers, trying to negotiate their way up to the fly. What we've heard is consistent with what we believe intuitively is that if there are viable options, it can be, the best thing we can do is provide viable options other than vehicles. We have some bike advocacy groups that are saying, hey, we're there to help. Can we chip in? Absolutely. We love people that are advocating for smart green solutions like more bike lanes, sidewalks, et cetera. So what we're looking at is in all of those cases along the fly, how we can incrementally improve the condition to allow to tie into the existing pedestrian paths that happen, and in some cases provide designated pedestrian and bike paths. Again, you'll see in the jogger, having to negotiate between the cars is always a difficult proposition. Drainage, we will talk, yes, come on up. Thanks, Emily.
We heard a lot during this process about drainage in the park. I think you saw in one of those earlier slides that it made up about 27% of the comments that we got in sort of some of those checking the box on the survey questions that we had. We particularly heard about it along Exposition Boulevard, and Audubon has undertaken a survey of the drainage in that area already. We think there are some short-term incremental solutions to some of these issues that can be begun to be implemented. There are several options that can be explored further. We conceptually explored how the lagoons could be used to enhance the drainage and improve flooding issues within the park. And how these lagoons can be used more effectively in the managing of the stormwater. This would involve dredging and stabilizing of the lagoons, as well as shoreline plantings to prevent erosion and further increase the ecological value of the lagoons. There are several green infrastructure techniques that could be implemented in phases, and some of them are represented here.
So of the many architectural features in the park, none has gotten the attention that Shelter 13 has. Ironically, of the thousands of comments during the vast majority of the process, there were no specific ideas or thoughts from the community about how the shelter could or should be repurposed. But we did hear, particularly in the final days prior to this meeting, is an increased desire to maintain the shelter and figure out what can be done with it. As planners and as architects, we recognize and appreciate the fact that the shelter does have some, even though it's not a designated historic structure, it does have historic significance. I think it's 1922 that it was built, so it's approaching 100 years of age. It's generally in good shape. It stylistically represents the period of time in which it was built. And we too are recommending that a use be found for the shelter. And like the tennis courts, we think this would be the perfect opportunity to, as an extension or similar to this process we're using for the master planning, that we open it up to a public process where we can find a good justification for using the shelter. We had noted in meeting number 3 the concern. We added the picture on the right. The shelter is exactly 37 feet from the curb. So we said, you know, if that's an 8-year-old, that's about 20 steps when the parent's head is turned. So, you know, you could say intuitively it's probably not the best locale for a family gathering space like an open shelter, given the heavy traffic on Magazine. But we, again, as we've said in the previous meetings, we welcome community ideas and input about how this beautiful structure can be repurposed in the future. So as we look to the future, we have a couple expansive ideas, longer-term ideas about what the park opportunities are. And the first is shifting from what we had called an incremental approach to water management to a larger, more holistic approach.
So as Mark alluded to, in addition to the short-term incremental phasing of green infrastructure improvements and drainage improvements in the park, we also recommend that that the park take a holistic, comprehensive view of stormwater management. We think that the park can embrace stormwater management as a real asset in the park, and that we want to focus on 2 goals, which is retaining more stormwater in the park as a benefit to the entire watershed, and then also reducing flooding and standing water within the park, which is inconvenient and unfortunate, you know, in when you're trying to use areas of the park. These ideas don't have to be mutually exclusive. We believe they can be done together. We believe that developing a systems approach to the stormwater management, looking at the entire watershed, the city has embraced this as well with the new comprehensive zoning ordinance and the Greater New Orleans Water Plan. And we believe that the park can be a significant partner in this effort. We also recommend investing in new green infrastructure systems to integrate with the existing drainage systems of the lagoons and increasing the ecological value of of the park. This also allows for multiple benefits that can be achieved with each investment in green infrastructure systems. These also further the educational and ecological mission of the park, and we believe that the park embracing this type of systems-wide comprehensive stormwater management plan would be a real educational asset to the community.
Thanks. The second long-term idea is, or future forward idea is a comprehensive signage and wayfinding program that ties, there's a wonderful story to be told. Some of it is already told in different ways in the park, but we see a great opportunity, and other parks have done this, embrace the idea of a comprehensive messaging for the entire park. And finally, what came up in several of the community meetings is, what about those properties up there along the river's edge? Could the park potentially procure those? And I think Ron's answer is yes. Why don't you get somebody go ahead and buy those and donate them to the park, and we'll give you big thumbs up. But seriously, you know, there are limited opportunities, but important opportunities to see if the park, in fact, can be expanded upon. And the park, we are including that in the park as a long-term vision. I'm going to cut through a couple of these to save time. 2 weeks ago, we received a letter from the National Association for Olmsted Parks. This is a wonderful organization that nationally has advocated for parks designed by either of the Olmsted brothers, and is out there making sure that people are doing the right thing. We received a letter, and we wanted to share with you some of the thoughts that the ideas that came out of that letter. These were two that were extremely important. Obviously, as landscape architects and a landscape organization, they said, you know, be sure not to treat this as a series of little incremental projects. That what holds this park together is the core consideration in this park is the landscape, and you should never lose sight of that. And it's a very important message that also underpins our master plan. And they went on further to talk with some really interesting insights about Olmsted's ideas about the park. I'm not going to go into them because there isn't the time, but it'll be included in our report, where they said make sure that the mission, the understanding of the design of this park continues to be central. But the tone of the letter was one of concern, and it was focused on this sentence, so you can read it. You know, will this overarching purpose survive if more facilities are added and ever less green space remains accessible and free? Those are the concerns we've heard for the last 4 months from many of you. And that's why what is central to the idea of this master plan is that the balance that we've achieved should not be shifted, that there should be no more programmed expansions take place in the park. So from that letter, we re-summarized our 3 core messages. Number 1 is that we do need and intend to, what will permeate this master plan is the idea that we are maintaining, protecting, and preserving the landscape. We love the idea that Olmsted thought about sustainability long before it became a 21st century catchphrase, and we embrace that as well. These ideas about comprehensive green infrastructure speak directly to addressing the natural condition that we have and embracing it. And last but certainly not least, the key message that we want you to have as the takeaway is that we recommend maintaining the current balance of programs and activities in the park. As we said, the schedule, we're going to be wrapping up with the final comments that we'll get this evening. We're going to be wrapping up the master plan. And what I'd like to do is have Kyle come up and talk a little bit about process and next steps.
Thank you, Mark. In terms of next steps, we wanted to make sure that everyone knows that the materials that are defining the master plan are still available on the website, and we intend to keep the Audubon Park Master Plan .org website up until January so that we can continue to receive comments and feedback from that. And also the written comments that you've submitted either by direct mail or to Audubon Park Master Plan at audubоninstitute.org. That's a long email address, but if you go to the website, you can find it. We will still continue to hear your feedback as we move forward, trying to submit the master plan ultimately for the Audubon Commission's approval. We've had some requests for hard copy access to the plan. Our intent is to try to do it electronically as much as possible as a conservation organization, not using paper and printing things with precious trees. However, we recognize that some people may still want access to a hard copy. So what we're going to do, if you email us at that email address, Audubon Park Master Plan at audubоninstitute.org, we'll make a hard copy available in our reception area of our administration building, along with all the subsequent supporting materials if anybody wants to see it directly there. We've also had a lot of interest from neighborhood groups to come and speak to neighborhood organizations, to advocacy organizations, to hear their thoughts and input more directly and ask specific and direct questions. We are happy to do that. Now that we're at this stage with the plan, anyone who's interested, again, email us at that web address, or that email address, I'm sorry, and we will move forward with trying to schedule time to come and visit with all of you. And then finally, Mark talked a little bit about this public process for some of the elements moving forward, particularly with Shelter 13 and with tennis, recognizing the diversity of opinions that are out there and the fact that we need to gather even more input. We want to continue the best practice of transparency and openness in that. So as we move forward on those particular items, we will be holding additional public meetings and getting all of your input so that we can really refine those ideas moving forward. With the rest of the plan, if our trajectory is clear and once it's approved, we will move forward with the work. We don't intend to slow down on upkeep and maintenance of those wonderful facilities that make Audubon Park great. And so we will continue apace once the plan is finally approved. And then in one particular note, back to Shelter 13, we've had a lot of interest from individuals because the facility has been closed for some time that have said, hey, can we get an eye on the facility, see what it looks like on the inside, and we are happy to do that. What we'll do is, again, if you're interested and you want to email us, we'll get everybody who wants to take a tour, and we'll all meet out there and check it out. For those that haven't seen it or don't know the history of it, it was decommissioned about 12 years ago, and the two enclosed spaces that you can't see are just former restrooms that have been decommissioned, and the fixtures have come out. But if folks want to see it, we're happy to show it to you. So that being said, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Mark. I did it at the right time.
Thank you. So at this point, we'll have our public comment period. Same rules. Yeah.
Before we get others from the public to comment, Councilman Giarrusso took the trouble to be here. Would you like to make any comments? Thank you.
The only thing I would like to say is obviously thank you to Audubon for having these meetings. I think they're an important process. I think even more important that what I was encouraged tonight to hear is there still remains some neighborhood and advocacy concern. So I appreciate the fact that you're going to keep the process open for neighborhoods and advocacy groups to continue to participate in this. And as we receive feedback, because we go to all the neighborhood meetings, we'll make sure to interface with both the neighborhoods and you as well so we can get a plan to a place that's acceptable to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And we certainly will work with you and those groups and appreciate those comments.
Okay, so at this point, just like the previous meetings, we've got a series of cards and comments. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes, and somewhere prior to 2 minutes, we'll be hearing a little, or at 2 minutes. Right at 2 minutes, you'll be hearing a little bell, so just complete your thought at that point. First up, Sandy Rosenthal.
She wants to.
Oh.
She just wants that red.
Oh, okay. Okay. I am a member of Audubon Tennis Club. I feel strongly that no courts should be converted from clay to hard. First up, Adrienne Petrosini.
Good evening, and I'd like to thank you all for your comments and for your hard work. I'd like to start with a quote that someone sent to me today, and it's, "Parks appear solid and unchanging, yet they are actually fragile. Made with great effort, they are easily unmade, easily altered, easily wrecked." So I appreciate the care you're taking in crafting the master plan, but there are some elements of it that I believe and others believe are still missing. You mentioned the Olmsted letter. One of the strong recommendations in the Olmsted letter was a heritage landscape study. And we would ask that you would consider having that as part of the plan as you move forward. We're also concerned that there are no experts who are ecologists, environmentalists, the trees, the plant life across the river, the conditions of the lagoon, the bird sanctuary, patterns of bird migration, and how the ecology is impacted by human use has not been addressed. And I don't know if our recommendation is that we are a park. One of your missions is conservation, and so we would ask that that be considered as you move forward. We're also concerned that there's a lack of a business or any kind of financial report in the master plan. And usually in master plans, having looked at other master plans, particularly Nashville, there are costs, expenditures, there are things that are just laid out in terms of funding, and that just does not seem to be a piece of the master plan at all. I know that a lot of effort was placed with the survey, but I think there needs to be continued outreach. Only 16% of the respondents were African American, and I think of one of the surveys, the average salary was $96,000, which does not seem representative of the city of New Orleans. So ask for additional community outreach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adrienne. Okay, next up, Gregory Ferris.
I live in the neighborhood. I've been playing on tennis courts at Audubon since the 50s, or maybe before that. And I've seen a lot of transitions. The courts are in pretty good shape right now, and I would hope that they'd continue to take advantage of the advances in tennis and what people know about them. I know that as an older guy, tennis courts that are made of clay are much better on the knees and the feet than otherwise. And I would really resist any thought of putting in hard courts. The clay courts are really good. They're good for kids. They're good for and so forth. And I think that lighting could be done appropriately. And I know you're going to have more meetings on tennis, so I'll just stop there.
Okay, well, thank you, Gregory. 68 years of tennis, that's impressive. Okay, next up, Levy Butler. Is that Levy? L-E-V-Y, Levy Butler? No? Okay. Kevin Thibodeau.
Hello, I was here last time. I'm with Bike Easy. I'm on the board. And last time we came, we were still in the process of getting our recommendation letter together, and we finally did get it out. So I brought it with me, and because it's only 2 minutes, I thought I'd just hit a point in it, and it has to do with the fly access. I'll just read from the letter, actually. This comes from our executive director. But building dedicated pedestrian and bicycle paths to, through, and from the fly, which I see you guys have already integrated to and from, which is good. Through, we still kind of in the air. I think y'all are still talking about that. Reduce car traffic congestion in the fly by allowing car access to the downtown fields and parking via a drop-off loop originating and terminating at East Drive. That kind of goes to, you guys talked about that two-way access, and I would kind
Right.
of agree with you that when you build it, they come. If you make car access more convenient, I think car traffic will go up. So one idea that came across our desk was having just a loop that gives you access to those fields. And right now, when you go through the flight, it feels kind of like a road with green space on either side, but make it a park first, kind of a road, if at all, second, but still allow bikes and pedestrians to go through it. And then the third request regarding the fly was to improve the pavement quality at the rail crossings, at the entry and exit points. There was just a lot of crumbling there. That might be part of the plan already, but it was something that came up. And that was it. I was just going to cover the fly. We're Bike Easy. We've doubled the bicycle network in New Orleans since 2011. There's an increasing amount of bicyclists. We ourselves have about 9,000 subscribers, and we see that growing a lot. So anyway, that's what we got.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks for your input, Kevin. Okay, Joseph Constance.
Good evening. I'm Joseph Constance. I'm also with Bike Easy. You have your tennis contingent, so we thought we'd get the bike folks out. And I'm sorry I missed the earlier presentation, but Kevin spoke about a few issues that we're interested in. I wanted to speak about a few others. You're going to have different folks who are interested in cycling, using the park. You'll have your contingent of racers who want access to the levee. One thing I think is important for those folks is the notion of having designated bike lanes on Magazine Street as part of the plan. I think that's very important, not only for the levee cyclists, but also for the families in the neighborhood who are coming in. I live over on State Magazine as well, and would frequently bike in with the kids when they were growing up. The levee, as you know, Magazine is the issue right now with not only the lack of bike lanes, but the quality of the street. So having bike lanes on Magazine, I think, is an extremely important issue. And the second, though, is designated spaces for locking up bikes so that people can use it to access the park, cut down on the car traffic, and feel like they can leave their bike in a safe place and access other aspects, including the zoo. So those are the two things that I want to talk about. I'm also a board member of Bike Easy. Bike Easy's willing to be a resource in the planning, and would love any opportunities to partner on increasing bike access in the park.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Okay, Mike McNulty. Oh, okay. I will go ahead and read his comment. It said, light for Audubon tennis courts, needed by citizens, demand, healthy sport of a lifetime. Is that a thumbs up? Next up, Robert Browning.
I'm a volunteer for the USTA. I'm currently the president of the New Orleans Metropolitan Area Tennis Association. We're the local USTA organization that run all of the adult leagues and junior tennis programs here in the city. The USTA has about 3,500 members in the metropolitan area, so it's a fairly large group of tennis players. I'm sure there are many tennis players who are not members of the USTA, so there are even more tennis players than that number might suggest. Our challenge at the USTA level is twofold: lack of tennis courts, lack of numbers of tennis courts, and having lighted tennis courts. Our league play, our adult league play, happens during the day and at night, and we do this year-round, 12 months out of the year. We struggle to find enough tennis courts for our night league players, so if Audubon could consider adding lights to their courts, it would really benefit the USTA members in our league play. I'm not a lighting expert, but I understand that there is LED lighting available for tennis courts these days, and it's low-level lighting and may not interfere with the neighborhood concerns. So, and I understand there's more meetings having to do with tennis that we'll be having at some point. So, look forward to coming to some further meetings and talking about it.
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Robert. Deborah Howell.
Hi. I would like to speak exclusively to the exclusion of the golf course from any of the master planning process. As far as I'm concerned, the exclusion of the golf course renders this a lovely puff piece document, but not a master plan. We have been calling for a master plan for Audubon Park for decades. The problem is we were told that the reason the golf course was excluded from this particular iteration of a master plan process was because it used state money. And state money required a 20-year lifespan. Well, it opened in 2002. That means 2022 will be the requirement, or the restriction will be lifted. And from a master planning point of view, that's next month. And we should be discussing now alternatives to the golf course since it loses so much money every year. It has suffered operational losses every year since it opened. I think in 2015 it was over $1 million. It needs to be rethought, maybe shrunk, maybe more of the land given back to the park. But the fact that this document includes nothing about master planning for the future of the golf course renders it absolutely useless.
Thank you. Mike Nias.
Hello. I'd like to talk about the stage for viewing pavilion a little more. I said in the first meeting we were going to restore it, and we're 3/4 of the way there. We've repainted all the masonry and metal components, and we now have a fabric roof that should last quite a while. I just want to say a little bit about the history of the project. There was a competition 25 years ago, and each team was required to have an architect. I was the architect on my team, and an artist. Steve Klein, sculptor, was our artist. And a number of prominent artists and architects in town competed. And one of our ideas was we wanted to do something that was sort of dealt with issues in the overlap between art and architecture, and also was functional for the community. A number of the schemes were sculpture and other things, but we wanted something that could be used. So, and a tribute to that is the fact that SQ Dumez Ripple had their crawfish boils there, thank you Tracy, every year. And there are many people that use it, and there's no one that really keeps tabs. But at one point, unless you lived under a rock a few years ago, you realize it was threatened to be removed from the site. And I was told that my sculpture would be stored. Number one, it's not a sculpture, and number two, it's not mine. It really was paid for with city funds. And originally the Arts Council sponsored that competition, and combined with funds for restoration, which were both private, donated, and supplied by the Arts Council. We've yet to see theirs, but we've got a start. It is over $100,000 in investment in the community, and that really was a bargain in terms of the amount of effort, planning, labor, and materials that went into it. So, and it was even suggested maybe we could move it to City Park. It's a site-specific design. It looks the way it is because it overlooks the Mississippi River. And if it were in City Park, it would be a different design. So I think good things happened, and when I look at the plan, that little island is the only space down at that end of the park that can be treed and landscaped. You can't have a tree in a soccer field or a baseball diamond. Okay. So I think it's an important public amenity. Okay, I'm wrapping up.
Yeah.
And I would like to see it thought of as for the foreseeable future as a part of the park and a part of the park that's used.
Okay.
We hope to have a celebration for it as soon as the restroom is complete. It might not happen till fall because of the weather, and hopefully I'll see all of you there. And I would
Okay.
hope that the
Thank you.
Carrollton Boosters would also use it for their events. I was a coach of both boys
You
and
need to
girls in
wrap
Carrollton
up,
Boosters.
Mike.
I'm rapping. I'm rapping. And simply put, it's important for people to see art and architecture as it is sport. And so
Okay.
hopefully it'll be there for a long time.
Thank you, Mike. Ann McKinley.
See if I can bring this down. Good evening. My name is Ann McKinley, a native New Orleanian who grew up using Audubon Park, as did my father, born in 1939, and my grandmother, born in 1912. I am here tonight to urge you to prioritize green space as you consider the final master plan. I firmly believe that public parks are a place for play, not profit. As the child of public school teachers, I was frequently in the park as a child, and now, but very infrequently able to attend for-pay features such as the zoo. We must ask ourselves if the guardians of our park system, a non-elected body who are supported with public funding, see that their job is to serve all citizens as they steward our park system. Do they ask themselves, how will our citizens benefit? Can the majority of our citizens access the features of this park? Are we good stewards of the existing natural park, including the plants and the current structures? Is the park duplicating efforts found elsewhere? I think that it is worth asking these questions openly and often. Once a feature of our park is removed, it is gone forever. Frederick Law Olmsted will never again be available. 100-year-old trees take time to grow. Taking away what is rare and unique in an urban setting, green space, cannot easily be restored. Green space has both environmental and health benefits. In a city that deals with water issues on a regular basis, green space is crucial to water management. Green space has also been shown to create an oasis of health within cities, improving mental health and the symptoms of chronic disease in cities, according to a study by the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Commissioners, green space is not a luxury. It is not an opportunity to make money on so-called improvements. It is a vital necessity in an urban setting. I urge you to prioritize the role of green space in your park planning. Before you attempt change, you should ensure that the park is the best that it can be. The citizens of New Orleans will benefit from a greener, more open park. We will happily be your allies in maintaining the park as a green haven for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Next up, Bill Ives.
Thanks again for the opportunity to speak. I saw much that I liked in the draft master plan, including more pedestrian and bike paths at the Riverview, greater protection of trees, and especially the commitment for no more further development of green space. And I heard that loud and clear in all of the meetings, and I believe you, but when I looked at the master plan online, I couldn't find it. Now, I don't think that's a conscious omission, but I would encourage you to make that loud and clear in the master plan document itself. I have one addition to the Riverview plans. I would like to see the Batcher Forest be preserved as much as possible. Certainly can be trimmed out a little bit, but that's a natural ecological system. The tree serves a function of protecting the shore as well as offsetting CO2 emissions. So I would like that to be a focus on the Riverview as well. And speaking on a larger scale, my final point, the current ratio of land use is 49% program space and 41% green and blue space. As I mentioned before, many of the great parks in other cities have a much larger percentage of green space. But There is a way to improve this ratio at Audubon without taking out any of the existing programmed activities. And you've thought about that in your plan. If the Bissell space is acquired, that would be a great opportunity to create a large green space park along the river, which I think would really be a major asset to Audubon. If it was done as largely green space in the Olmsted tradition with views of the river, nice landscaping, and it would raise the national kind of status of Audubon to have this gym with us. So I'll say one more point. If Bissell could be acquired, let's not waste this opportunity to create this green space by filling it with programmed activities. If there was position to do that, I would certainly contribute to it personally if it was to be more than 80% green space. And I would support a millage to fund that, again, if it was more than 80% green space. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Carrie Becker.
Hi. Thanks again for having a fourth meeting. I am the local league liaison for the United States Tennis Association's Southern Section. I'm also on the board for Nomada with Bob. And to add to what he said, we have a lot of tennis players in this area. We actually have the most tennis players in this area in the state of Louisiana. And we have the least amount of tournaments we're able to host here, and it's of lack of courts and lights. So not only league play, but I know a lot of the local players, like myself, do not like going to Monroe and Shreveport every 6 months or every 4 months. We would love to be able to host some more tournaments here, and I look forward to having more meetings to discuss the lights of all 10 clay courts soon. You gonna notify me?
Yes, yeah, oh, absolutely. No,
Okay.
it'll be a public forum.
Will
Yes.
you send me an email or something? Do I have to find it?
We will, we'll have to figure out what the process is, but I think we know, yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Cindy Morse.
I'll break tradition and not even take 2 minutes. The key is balance. Right now, the balance is pretty close. Programmed, not programmed. Think about our cities. So many poor people, they can go up to the Riverview on a Sunday afternoon and enjoy their families. They can't afford the boosters, the zoo, a lot of other things, though they might occasionally, which is nice. But to continue to pay attention to the whole city and keep it balanced. If we get more land, hey, make it green space and keep what we've got in good shape. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Harish Sujan.
Hi, I'm part of the very vocal tennis group, but I'm also part of Chilean University, so allow me to say something about both as quickly as I can. For the vocal tennis group, I just want to highlight what I think you understand perfectly, that for the amount of noise we make, the acreage we've got is somewhat disproportionate. So we just want to make that as a point for making our case. The thing that terrifies me about the tennis facility is the baseballs coming over. I know you're aware of it. I know everyone's thinking about it. I grew up in India where people used to get hit on the head with cricket balls and have concussions. And so I just hope that we can pay a little more attention to this. Of course, I endorse the lights and so on. Now about Tulane, there are just two things that stand in my mind. One is this issue about Magazine Street. They've got Ferret Street where students are walking across constantly, half a campus on either side. And students don't look up when they cross, so it's kind of a dangerous thing. They've got this very huge crosswalk and it's working perfectly. So I wonder if that might be something that you might consider. And the more broader point is that a couple of big universities right across the park must be somewhat unusual, but I don't see that much crossing lines, and I might be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. So the focus on environmental responsibility that parks adopt and that you've adopted. I think our students have that in mind too, and some very specific groups might be much better at it, like maybe the School of Architecture. I certainly know I'm in the School of Business that I teach something about business valuing greening, even though it might not help their profits. So maybe some crossing of boundaries might be a worthwhile thing to think about.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Ed Conti.
How do you do? Ed Conti. I live nearby here, and I do have some concerns with your master plan. To start with, the Audubon Nature Institute sounds great. That's who I would want in charge of my park. But slide 1.3, the environmental stewardship is your last concern. Behind recreation, access, which I imagine is cars, very disappointing. I think that your plan is biased. The park is heavily managed, and I'm concerned about any more paving or building. We don't want to see any of that. You want to talk about your 47, the managed areas within the park comprise about 80% of the park. Okay. The grass parking lot between the zoo and Magazine Street, you can't consider that unmanaged space. You can't have children playing out there where the car has been leaking oil. That's insane. And my understanding is that the soccer field is managed by the Carrollton Boosters. I'm not sure how that works, but it's called managed. So you're down to about 80%. We need to reclaim green space back. The first place, I think, as mentioned earlier, is the golf course. We need to cut that down to 9 holes. I'm opposed to the two-way traffic that you're proposing. It's just going to make more congestion. You know, I live nearby. We don't really want that happening. I mean, I think there's some ideas that you could have, but you got to realize that this is a parking lot. It's not a road, and that's how it should be treated. You know, it's not for somebody to get to the store, get somewhere quick, and get out. We need to have a 5-mile-per-hour limit. So my concern is that you're doubling down on your past mistakes. The golf course has pushed pedestrians and bicyclists across Magazine Street. So now you're looking to implement that, where what you really need to do is go back and reclaim the space so it's not necessary. The other thing you're doubling down on is the soccer field and the baseball diamonds have created traffic jams. And now you're having to mitigate the traffic jams. So I think that you really need to consider these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Next up, Sanket Vyas. No. Said the comment was possible to place lights on oaks in front of our house, to be done by licensed electrician. Did we do Richard? Yes. Richard Carrier. I think so.
I have 3 things I want to talk about. At the railroad track? Maybe the other end? There, okay. Yeah, so one of my concerns about the two-way traffic, you see the green path going up by River Road? The parking is perpendicular. What will remain will be perpendicular. And when it's busy, the cars can be very tight. If that suggests, I don't know because I haven't seen anywhere where it goes, but if it suggests they're going to be going in a lane on the left side, I'm concerned when cars go to back up, they might not see a bike. Mm-hmm. And also when you have two-way traffic at 20 miles an hour, they're coming towards each other possibly at 40 miles an hour, closing the gap. But I'm just concerned about people being able to back up safely without an accident. And also with the two-way, I love the idea, I love the concept if it works, but with the two-way, with one way, the cars tend to go down the middle. With two-way, they're going to be to the sides. So it really makes the parking people backing up more iffy. Okay, the other point, the Batur Forest, as you know, I consider it, of all the Audubon facilities, perhaps the rehab center has healthy Batur, the only authentic, natural Louisiana habitat that's at any of those places, because it's still connected with the flow of the river and the sediments of the river, which was the lifeblood that even formed New Orleans, where New Orleans is built. So to me, that's very important, and as Bill Ives suggested, some thinning, because some people want a better view, some thinning of it is appropriate for that, but try to preserve the majority of it. In fact, you had a photograph, I remember from, I don't know if you showed it today,
yes,
of somebody looking with binoculars into
yes.
it.
Yep.
The BISO area, I would also be willing to contribute to that. We could start a fund and see if we can do it, except that if they know that, they might raise the price. We have to be careful. And I mentioned, I brought up issues of management. There were no restrictions that I saw on what we could, so I brought up the issue, long-term issue of our future. I'm thinking hundreds of years into the future, we have to change our ways with throwaway materials. And I know at the Carrollton Boosters, they have a concession that generates a huge amount of business, but also a lot of that gets thrown away. So I'm thinking, and I also know that Audubon Institute has been on board that, and they're working on that at various facilities with their education program and actually walking the talk, implementing that. I'd like to see the Carrollton Boosters, with all their tremendous enthusiasm, start implementing reducing the use of recyclables. People could bring their own 12-ounce cup. They could fill it for them. And what they do have to recycle it. Yeah. And also aluminum cans are almost totally recyclable. They don't make microplastics and things like that. They get into our bodies. Yeah. But ideally, what I call pre-cycling.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Rich. Grace Hill.
I think there should be no new buildings. We should keep the free green space. No new lighting. No new parking. Leave the park alone. The park should be open to the public. Free and public as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Lewis Shepard.
A couple of the speakers talked about doing something with a golf course. I just wanted to offer that we're more than happy to have more tennis courts built on some of those holes if y'all want to cut it back. Kill two birds with one stone. No, you did mention there's been overwhelming support amongst the tennis community for the tennis facility. So I'm just curious why you've singled out tennis for having more meetings to drill down. You said you've had overwhelming support, and yet you want to hear the other side of the story. I haven't heard you want to drill down to why, hear from the people who want to park on Oak Tree Road. So I just want to know why you selected the tennis to drill down further into that.
And I think that's worth a response. There is clearly a significant amount of support for tennis and expansion, and it's a heritage. It's part of the legacy of the park. The challenges that we've heard anecdotally in a couple of the previous meetings about concerns, as I think as Grace had just expressed, concerns that even something like lighting could have adverse effect on it. So we're not in a position to be able to make a strong recommendation one way or the other till we get more facts. And here, clearly we've heard the advocacy for the tennis, and it's obviously very passionate, so thanks for everybody showing up. But we do need to better understand what the implications are to the neighborhood of adding tennis at night. Hopefully that clears it up. Carla Robertson.
Good evening.
evening. I didn't know that I was going to stand up and speak, so pardon me if this is a little out of order and discombobulated. I've lived here since 1992. I've never lived less than a mile and a half from the park. I got married at Audubon Park 23 years ago, before the clubhouse was built on that inside part of the lagoon. My husband and I go back there every year at Jazz Fest and have a toast. And we see so much wildlife, even in that area right by the golf courses. This year, there was a mother turtle who had come out of the lagoon and was laying her eggs. Crow was watching her. We were like, is the crow waiting to get the... And then he walked back with her to get into the lagoon. These are the kinds of things that you can only see if there is space for the wildlife to live. I was a teacher, a science teacher for 16 years here. I brought my students to Audubon Park all the time. I preferred bringing them there than to the zoo. We would go and we would do dip netting and learn about the ecology. I worked with the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation to do water testing of both the lagoon and the Mississippi River. We had years of data that we presented to our school community and the larger community, looking at everything from nitrates and phosphates, dissolved oxygen. But more recently, I go to that Batur forest all the time. Have you all heard of forest bathing? It's kind of in the news now more, and the term forest bathing. Yeah. And I went every day in January. I walk along there. I pick up tremendous amounts of trash every time. And I think it's I see so much wildlife. I've seen hawks, great horned owls, beaver. Do you know that there are beaver all through that area? They cut a lot of trees themselves. I would say there's plenty of views of the river all along that other green lawn area. And it's one of the very few places where the wildlife here has a place to go. I'm like, where are the possums supposed to go? And also, you know, considering this concept of, well, I know, yeah, they're in my backyard too. They're on my porch, they're under my house, and they live there too. Also, looking at single-use plastic, that's a lot of what I pick up when I pick up the trash. And I'm wondering if there's something in the master plan also about managing litter on especially at the Fly, where there isn't a lot of trash cans, and after a weekend, they're overflowing. I asked the guy that I saw recently, and the dumpsters are not coming back, he said. I know it's an issue, but I would, you know, I feel like the Lorax here, but I think that this is an important thing looking forward that we need to be thinking about, not just the uses for the humans. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Final card, unless there's somebody holding one. Alita Seeger.
Hi. I also wasn't prepared to speak, but after listening to, I was here the last meeting and this meeting, I didn't grow up around here. I don't live around here. I grew up in the 9th Ward. So much of the space that is used in the park are things that cost money: golf, tennis, the stables, the private baseball fields. And there's just not enough green space for just poor people. I know, you know, my family couldn't afford. Now, in the 9th Ward, you didn't even know how to play tennis or golf, and never had a horse. I'd like to see that what another speaker said about the golf course. If it's only grandfathered in to 2022, let's start making plans about that. Also, perhaps the baseball fields that are private. What we had in our neighborhoods were playgrounds, and the baseball fields were open to everyone, except when Nord was having a team play. And let's see what else. Maintaining the current balance of green space. I just think that, I don't want that. I want more green space, like doing away with some of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alita. One more card. Nick Bowie? I'm sorry, is it Nick? Nicole, I'm sorry. Nicole.
Good evening. I was not prepared to speak at all. My name is Nicole Bowie. I'm the director of the Community Commitment Education Center, Uptown, on Spruce and Leonidas. This letter, I think you guys received to the commissioners. I was not a part of the writing, and I wanted to make sure I was clear about that. But I also wanted to say, I run a community center that serves elders, children, and we use the park. We love the park, every aspect of the park. I love to eat in the park. We need the green space, all of it. It's important to me that you guys know to remove that space changes lives. And I really mean that. I grew up in this neighborhood, born and raised, poor, black, and believe me, one Saturday you will fish, one Saturday you will swim, one Saturday you will have a ball game going. This park changes lives. And it's so important to everything we do as a community in the community center. So consider that. It's not just Carrollton boosters. It's not just the persons who are architects who are doing whatever. It's the children, you know, and the children who grow up to respect this community, okay? But I wanted to make sure you knew, and you knew, and you knew, we need you.
Thank you, Nicole. Final request, any further comments? Any further cards? Okay, Kelly?
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your comments. Please stay engaged. I know you will. That's why you're here. But stay engaged. We really do welcome your input and we'll continue to work with you as has been talked about tonight. Thank you.